Hello and welcome to today's Mind Your Career webinar. My name is Adam Sylvain and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled Career Pathways in the Humanities, an Alumni Panel Discussion. A quick caveat, unfortunately, one of our alumni panelists, due to unforeseen scheduling conflicts, cannot be with us today, but we do have Carly Buxton, who is a 2016 PhD graduate of the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilizations. Currently, she leads qualitative market research and user research as Director of Marketing Insights at EF Education First, the world leader in international education. Short intro for Carly, because she'll have much more to say about her studies and her current career. Our moderator for today's panel is Courtney Wiersma, who's Associate Director of Graduate Career Development at UChicago Grad. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to cede the floor to Courtney.
Thank you, Adam, and hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And I'm delighted to be here with Carly and to have the opportunity to ask her a few questions about her career path with the hope that it gives some insight for those of you who are listening. And I think we were going to begin, before asking Carly a few questions, with a poll question that Adam was going to facilitate. Is that correct, Adam?
Yes, I will launch that poll now.
Wonderful. We were hoping just to get a sense of who is in the audience so that as we have the conversation, it can be as helpful as possible to those of you who are listening.
All right, so it's being distributed now and we have folks weighing in, so just a few more seconds to collect their responses and I'll share those out.
Sounds good.
All right, another second or two to make your choices. All right, so let me share the results here. So we have 14% who are current PhD students, 14% who are recent alums with less than 5 years postgraduate experience. Then we have 7% who are 5 to 10 years post-graduation PhD alumni, and then another 14% who are 10 years plus post-graduation, and we have 50% who are not PhD alums but are interested in learning more.
Awesome. Sounds like a great range. Glad to have you all here. Well, I'd like to begin by just asking Carly to tell us a bit about her current position and the path she took from the PhD to get to that role. So Carly, if you don't mind starting with your trajectory, that would be great.
Sure. I'll try to be exciting enough to make up for the other panelists who couldn't be here today. I have plenty to say, so that shouldn't be a problem. I graduated in 2016, as Adam said, and I at that time knew that I wanted to move to Boston. So I decided to look at jobs that were at universities, mostly in international studies departments, and thinking that I might get into working in admin for a university or something like that. But at the same time, I knew of the existence of my company, EF Education First, because my husband had actually worked there as an entry-level salesperson back in 2008. And he said, my husband said, you know, you should look at EF and see if there happen to be hiring for any kind of position. And I looked online, and it just so happened that they were building a new team where they specifically wanted outside perspectives. They were building a team to look at product development for educational tours. And so I think, you know, I pursued a lot of different directions as I was trying to figure out what was right for me. But then I started interviewing at EF, and the company really clicked. And I was hired on this team to work on, it was called market development. So it's essentially product development, product management, and connections with the marketing team, the finance team. You really serve as a hub for all of these educational tours that we offer. And I was overseeing products, the tour products in Asia, so China and Japan, and then also parts of Northern Central Europe. And that's how I got my start at EF, and I was director of market development for the first 2 years at the company. And during that time, I really gravitated toward the customer insights and market research elements of managing a portfolio. So whenever I had to make a decision about the products, I was really leaning on talking to customers and doing research and doing ethnography and using all of the skills that I had used as a PhD student in the humanities to manage these products. And so eventually I said, this is my favorite part about the job that I do, and I really would like to focus on this exclusively. And I believe that our company should have a team dedicated to doing this for all of the products that we offer. And so my team was born, and I am director of market insights for EF. And so what that means is that I do user research and market research, primary and secondary research, trying to understand what's going on in education today, what's going on in the lives of parents, what's going on in the lives of students, and all of the different tiers of the people who we consider to be our customers. Understanding their motivations and challenges and bringing that back to the product, to our messaging, and to our customer experience.
Great. Wonderful. My next question kind of focuses on that period where you were thinking about pursuing other options, or you mentioned that geography was a factor in shaping the career and the direction you ultimately took. But I'd be curious to know next, when and how did you decide that you didn't want a career in academia? Because for so many people in a PhD program, that is the default. So I'd be curious to know more about your decision-making process.
So I saw this question, and I feel like I have two answers to it. I can definitely remember a moment when I thought, okay, I need a break. And the moment was, so I'm Asian Studies is my field, and our big conference is AAS. And in 2016, I went out to it. It was in Seattle. And I just remember sitting there at one of the keynote panels, and it was so dry and formulaic, and nobody was listening, and they are all just looking down at their phones. This huge room, it wasn't full of people. It was like mostly empty chairs, but it was, anyone who was there was doing something else. And I just thought, I cannot live a life where this is the scholarship that's happening. I need a break from this. I also need maybe this industry itself to change a little bit and to offer something that's more stimulating before I can see myself in this field again. And I do think that comes a lot from a University of Chicago perspective, where we are taught so much to consider the application of what we do. So I remember early on in my career, I had a professor say, whatever you think you're researching, you're not actually researching. Those are just the fine, very, very detailed elements and that you are using as a tool for what you are actually trying to understand, which is something about humanity or something about the way we think. And that really framed my own experience. And so when I was listening to people deliver their research all throughout my time at the University of Chicago, I would always think, what's the point of what they're actually working on? Is it useful? Or is it just interesting? Is it just details that are fascinating, but they're, to what end? And so it was frustrating for me at this conference to see panel after panel after panel where the research was fantastic, but the application of it was so limited in scope. So that was definitely a moment. But the part two answer to this question is, it says, like, when did you decide you did not want a career? And I really did not, and I still don't know what the future holds for me. I never decided that it was not for me. I just decided I needed a break. And I live in a very hybrid world right now where I work at a private company, but I'm still very much engaged in my research as a historian. And so, I mean, my book is under contract for publication, which is based on my dissertation. So I still work on that quite a bit. I still go to conferences. I mean, Courtney and I, we met at AHA just not too long ago. So I still do that. I keep my eye on job postings. I'm adjuncting this summer at a business course, actually, interestingly enough. So I stay engaged and involved, and I'm not sure what the future will hold for what it is that I do. Also because I think that higher education is changing and is so disrupted right now that we can't be like, I wonder if there's a future where everyone is just kind of an adjunct plus something else. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very possible. And I think that it could even really serve the college model well if more people were not tenured, believe it or not. Yeah.
No, thank you. And I think that resonates with a lot of the work we're trying to do at UChicago grad to show that there's not a binary necessarily between academic work and the rest of the world, that some of the same skills and ways of thinking can be useful in both realms. And I think Carly's model of having an academic career in a different kind of context is really, is probably a lot of the future for a lot of people. But along those lines, Carly, I'd also like to know, specifically, you started to talk about, skills or things from the PhD that you do find that you use in your day-to-day work. So I'd love for you to speak more about that. And I'm also curious if there are ways that you think you do this job differently than someone who might have come to it from a business school or a marketing program.
Yes. So one skill that I definitely use is project management. And that is something that in the interview process, I was able to speak about. So I was really worried when I was interviewing, like, oh, what are they going to ask me? I don't know anything about business. But if you have written a dissertation, if you have scoped out a multi-year project and stayed on top of it and finished it, then you are an expert project manager. And so I used my dissertation as an example in a lot of the stories that I told during my interview process. And I mean, if you think about it, you have managed coursework, you've applied for countless grants and scholarships, you have juggled your advisors, you've mentored your junior colleagues. I mean, everything is a small piece of something that takes at University of Chicago like 6+ years. And so I think project management skills, when you walk away from that degree, like you are an expert project manager for sure. And I use that quite a bit now. The projects are so much shorter, which is wonderful. They're like 2 months long instead of many years. So that absolutely. A second thing is the work that I do in user experience, so UX, I think it's fantastic for humanities PhDs to look into, because it has a lot to do with trying to understand through primary research. So anthropologists, sociologists as well, historians who have done interviews and who have had these conversations with individual subjects and tried to extrapolate from what they say some greater theory or some key insights about how they navigate their lives or how they see the world. So I think those skills that I have from primary research, I use absolutely every day as a user researcher. And that's like a career I did not know about, but I have friends from the University of Chicago who are also user researchers now, who are anthropologists. And so look into that as a possible career, because you're basically still doing all of the stuff that you love as a researcher, but you don't have to grade papers. So yeah, so definitely interviewing. Distilling insights is a huge part of that as well. So we as scholars are used to finding all of these disparate sources, whether they are primary, maybe they're secondary, and looking at them and plowing through them and saying, what lines do I draw? What connections do I make? And what can we learn from that? And what actions can we take from that? And that's the work of a lot of strategists, consultants, a lot of people in the business world, distilling insights from disparate sources. And that's something that we do absolutely as doctoral candidates as well. And then another skill that came to mind when I saw this question was storytelling. So we are so used to being, we're used to being at the front of the room a lot of the time as TAs or as instructors, and trying to captivate everybody, trying to get them behind an assignment or a key learning that we're trying to deliver. And so I definitely feel that I developed a lot of storytelling tactics when I was at the University of Chicago, trying to make my research speak to people. And that's been really rewarding as a person in the business world, just to be able to captivate people, even when it could be something that they may think, this doesn't really interest me or apply to me. You know, different people in the room, maybe they're from the finance team and I'm going to talk about, Japan, and they don't care. But then through the stories that I tell, they do care. They start to care. And I think that's been great as well. In terms of your other part of that question, which is, what's different about the way I approach things versus someone who was not a PhD? I don't know if it has to do with the degree. I think a lot of that stuff has to do with your personality type. So, like what your strengths are, for example, if you've done Strengths Finders, or if you've done Myers-Briggs, and like just the way people's minds are organized, I think really is more telling about how they approach their work. But I will say that the fact that I have a PhD, it changes the way that I am perceived in a room and put forward in a business. I really do believe. I think that just the credential itself changes the way that people relate to you and the kind of advice that they seek from you, and then also the way they trust you more, especially in front of customers. They're like, oh, we'll push the PhD. Like, go talk to this person because, make sure you mention your PhD. Like, I think that it's valuable in many ways, just because it is a credential that says, hey, we worked really, really hard and thought very, very hard for a long time. And that is something that makes our opinions inherently valid in a lot of business rooms.
Wonderful. As a follow-up,
I'm gonna turn on my little space heater because I'm freezing cold in my house. So tell me if it's too loud. Okay. I live in Boston. It's freezing around here. Is it okay? Does that sound okay?
I can't hear a thing. So
okay, great.
Wonderful. So as a follow-up, I would be curious, because you're coming from an area studies background and you had specialty in East Asia, is that something that you still use as part of your job, or does that inform the work you do? I know so many students are eager to hold on to that content expertise as well as the skills, and might feel a sense of loss if they don't have that. So I'd be curious how that comes up day to day.
I'm feeling the sense of loss now because I transitioned from the role of overseeing these tour products that went to Asia into this role, which is exclusively now market insights. When I was director of market development working on tours in Asia, I used Japanese and Chinese every day. I mean, I was on websites sourcing different activities. I was talking to our staff in China and Japan, and it was really nice because it wasn't it was day-to-day type of stuff. I think in your second language, you're kind of like, let's not talk about anything super in-depth, but it was all useful words and phrases and things that I felt like, oh, I'm actually basically a member of a company in Japan or in China. So that was excellent and very rewarding. And then content knowledge-wise, I feel like we were able to make the tours that our company offers to those regions even more authentic, more rooted in the true culture that I learned about so much and care so passionately about as well. Then I transitioned into a market research role where I help all different teams, and I don't use my Asian expertise the way that I did in the other role. They did just ask me to teach Japanese class as like an extracurricular for the employees, so I'm considering that. And then, of course, whenever anyone's going to travel to Japan, they always book me for 30 minutes and they want to talk about like my Japan recommendations. So, and I'm called in on a lot of things that relate to Asia. We just celebrated Lunar New Year, and so I helped out with some company morale type of stuff where we walked around with, handing out clementines and wishing people good fortune for the new year, that kind of thing. So it's part of my identity still that I am an Asian specialist, but it's not a huge part of my day to day, which is, I think, why it's so important to me that I still am engaged so actively in my research, because I would really miss it. I would feel a hole, which I did not think I would feel when I was preparing to graduate. I was like, I don't want to see this stuff ever again. I don't want to think about Asia for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. But a few months go by, and it's a huge part of your life, and you love it enough to pursue a PhD on it. So you can't just walk away from it. And I think that a lot of people here, if they do end up pursuing something in a completely different field, they will find ways, either through hobbies or through the work that they're actually doing, to stay close to a subject that they care so passionately about.
Thanks. Well, my final set of questions kind of keep in mind our audience, especially people who might be still graduate students and exploring career options, or early, mid, or even late career, and kind of thinking about what other possibilities might be if they have a similar background and training. So would you be willing to share some advice for people who are looking to make similar transitions, both, I think, out of the academy generally, but to market research in particular, if that would be great?
I have a lot of advice. The first is to start now. Get alternative work experience now, which may seem completely out of the question, but actually is not. So I have a dirty little secret about my time at the University of Chicago, which like hardly anybody knew. I was also, in addition to being a student, I was also an international flight attendant for Delta, which I remember going to the ombudsperson and being like, is this legal? Can I actually hold this job in addition to being a scholarship student here at the University of Chicago? And they're like, oh yeah, I guess so, as long as it's okay with your advisor. So my advisor was fantastic, and he's like, that sounds like the coolest thing ever. So I worked in like the basement of Regenstein Monday through Friday, and then I would fly out and be a flight attendant over the weekend with Delta. And I did that because I was drowning in this isolation of the life of a graduate student, where all you're doing is like talking to your research all day long, and or maybe a couple of department events. And I thought, I'm drowning here, and I need to see people, and I need to feel what it's like to be at a company, and I need to do something different, like get a hobby. And the hobby that I got was to become a flight attendant for Delta. And through that experience, I saw the way that a company operates and the way that it feels to be an employee of something in the business sector. And it was so different from the life of a graduate student that it just opened my eyes in so many different ways. And I'm not saying that people out there who are PhD students need to go get like another full-time job. It can be something as simple as, starting your own mini strategy consulting business, or working as an intern, one day a week or one evening a week at a church. I mean, anything where you are working different muscles and using different brain functions and talking to different kinds of people than you usually do in your everyday life. So start now with getting alternative work experience. So, and I think a really great time to do that is the summertime, in between in between semesters, because maybe you're like, oh, I gotta go work on my research in Japan. But actually, maybe it would be better if you get, it's just some sort of analyst job at a company that is interesting to you, a company that you kind of admire, and see if you can be an intern there for the summer. And so yeah, like there's another world outside of the world of a graduate student, but it's impossible to get a taste for it if you are constantly being a graduate student. So reach out and think about the other kinds of work that interest you, and start making steps in that direction. It doesn't mean you're turning your back on the work that you do. So that takes me to another piece of advice, which is it's not shameful to be something other than a tenure track professor. And that is something that I think is really important for us to remember, because especially because we attended such a great university, and Research One, and a lot of advisors especially have high hopes that you will do the university well by getting a great job, and they want to be able to point to your example and say, look at where this person is now. This person has tenure track jobs are disappearing, and we get them. And they're also passionate. Your committee is so passionate about the work that you're doing. Like, they believe in the research that you're doing, and they hate the idea that it's for naught, that you won't publish that book, or you will step away, you'll close your computer and not make something of all of the wonderful thinking you've been doing for so many years. It's sad for them, but it's our lives, and so it's really important to know that you're not, like, maybe you actually are letting them down, but they shouldn't be let down by you pursuing a path that is not academia. So that's like an emotional level thing that's important to keep in mind. Another piece of advice, so advice 3, is to talk to other people who have done it. So reach out to people who have been in a similar position where they were considering an academic track but have turned in a different direction, and get their candid opinions for how it feels to be outside the ivory tower, and what they might have done differently, and what they like about their life now, and just try to understand from their situation how that might apply to your own proclivities. Then number 4 advice is to become a specialist at something. This is also advice that I give people in the working world, like junior people who are new to my company, and they want to, help me guide my career type of questions. I think that it's really useful to become a specialist at some element of what you are doing. And the best way to do that is to figure out, what are you really great at? And that's probably what you're doing your PhD on. So to speak from my own example, I am a market researcher and a user researcher. And I do a lot of work trying to understand the way people are motivated, how they make decisions. Well, that's great, because my dissertation was about how people make decisions, and elements of human behavior that are guided by the physical environment. So that's new and different in a lot of ways to market research and to user research, because there are these practices of how to interview people, and there is already a well-established practice of ethnography in user research. But I think that I can become a specialist in the semiotics of human beings and how they respond to the signs in their environment and how they make decisions based on that. And so I'm still applying the work that I've done, which is heavily embedded in psychology and neuroscience. That's work that I did on my dissertation, but I'm applying it and trying to be a specialist as a user researcher by incorporating that kind of knowledge. So, and I think it's really interesting to say to a person who's starting out, like, what are you going to be a specialist on? Okay, so what panels, what themes of panels or workshops or classes are you signing up for? you may be signing up for them now, and keep doing so. Keep taking those like online courses or whatever they are. Keep studying, reading every book about it, reading blogs about it, listening to podcasts about it. And before you know it, you will be leading the panel. You will be delivering the lecture on this one little element of something that you're very interested in. So become a specialist at something. And that's always really fun for us because we are researchers. And so we want to keep learning. And so we can dive deep into a new corner of an industry, for example. Then the last bit of advice that I wrote down was, you will miss it. You will miss a lot about being a doctoral candidate, being in a university environment where it's like, oh, smart molecules are just flying around in the air. So when you transition, if say you make the leap and you do something new, or you're going to try something that's not an academic job, identify what it is that you're missing and find ways to incorporate it into your work life. So for me, one of the things that I missed the most was students coming and asking me to help guide their like career choices or their final project or something like that. I love that. They go, oh, they're so excited and they care so much about this one thing, and oh, what's out there for them, and then I started working this business and nobody's asking me for anything like that. So I made it clear that to a lot of people that, all right, if you have these junior colleagues, people new to your team, people who are thinking that they're ready for something new, they're ready for a new, maybe they're considering graduate school, send them my way, because I thrive on those kind of conversations. And so I get to be a mentor in many ways at my company now. So that's that last bit of advice that I thought of, which is figure out what it is that you truly miss and incorporate that into your work life or also into your personal life as well, if you can't find a way to bend your job, but try to bend your job.
Mm-hmm. Great. I have one final question, and then I think we'll open it up to questions from the audience. My final question is just tactical. So I think you offered wonderful advice about framing and big picture and how to think about getting what you want from your life and your job. When it actually came time to apply, create resumes, do interviews, are there any particular challenges that you ran up against because you were coming from a PhD program, or any other advice that you'd give in that kind of tactical realm?
Yes, it's hard to swing a PhD to a lot of jobs. So I was fortunate because I had a connection at this company. My husband had been there. It was years before, but like he still knew one person. And so that's the kind of thing that can get your resume put to the top of a pile, whereas it may not be the case in a lot of other roles. So I think the best way to think through that would be to just plan ahead what all of the possible interview questions that you might have. Try to figure out, just kind of like the way you would apply to a program or a university, figure out what matters to this company, figure out how they position themselves by looking online, by reading Glassdoor, what's their company culture, and pitch yourself as a person who fits their company culture, perhaps not necessarily even the specific role that you're hiring for. And something I did not understand much about the business world at all, but do now, is that if applications are not from the internet. Like if you think you're going to get a job by like applying to a bunch of places online, then maybe you will, but it's really hard. So my advice would be to do as much networking, even if it's digital networking through LinkedIn, that you possibly can. And if you're interested in a company and they don't have an open requisition for a job, but you really think you would be a strong fit there, then start just having phone calls with people who will take your phone call and learn about their story and learn about their company culture and network in that way. That's how I would advise like approaching the actual process of applying. And then once you are there, there's also such a learning curve for being in a business environment. I remember that I had 2 monitors at my desk, and I'd only ever used my little laptop. And so I didn't know how to make the mouse go between monitors. I mean, I'd never used Outlook before, all of these things that are so second nature to people who have worked outside of academia. I mean, I went straight from undergraduate into a degree, so I had never needed to know that kind of stuff. So I think a lot of people would say, ask questions, ask, anything you don't know, ask questions. That's kind of true, but don't ask everything, because then people will, you'll lose some credibility. So there's a lot of being like, I don't know what in the world is going on with Outlook, so let me Google how to look at someone else's calendar and find that out online, and just enjoy the learning curve.
Great. Well, I think I'll turn it back over to Adam at this point for audience questions.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you both so much, Courtney, for facilitating, and Carly for all of your thoughtful perspective. I would like to, again, open up the floor for anybody to submit questions. Make sure you do that to the questions box on the control panel. We did have an attendee who had a ditto to Carly's point about working with non-academics and missing the connection with kind of the academic realm, and you've mentioned, Carly, that it's been so important for you to stay engaged in your research outside of your full-time work. So one question I have is related to kind of that work balance or work harmony question that people are always talking about, but how you in your new role now are able to kind of find the time, and how you prioritize that research that you continue to do.
So I like that question, because it lets I can trace like a little bit of that journey. So I now work part-time as a market researcher, and that is because I got this book contract, and I thought, I don't know if I can be a mother and write a book and have a full-time job at the same time. Fortunately, first of all, it's like, I think it's very hard to find part-time jobs, but if you've been established in a place and you've proven your worth and you've made relationships, a lot of companies are willing to work with you on adjusting your schedule to a way that's going to fit what your actual life goals are. And fortunately, my company is fantastic, and they worked with me to try to figure out, okay, this is important to you. You're going to, continue your research, and you're trying to finish a book manuscript. So what kind of schedule is going to be necessary to make that happen? So I work part-time at EF and part-time as a historian. I think it's possible to do both and to stay engaged. So, like, one example would be working full-time, but then adjuncting an evening course or teaching online. There's so many wonderful ways to stay a teacher in this day and age because of these fantastic platforms that exist that are not just universities online or open courses, but learning platforms are growing, and you can actually get paid by teaching classes in something that you are a specialist in. So there are ways to stay active at night and on the weekends. It's just a matter of what your appetite is and how busy you want to be. Yeah.
Thank you. So another question, kind of referencing your advice about networking and kind of doing what you can to maybe move that resume to the top of the pile, as opposed to just, kind of throwing your hat in the ring, so to speak. Were there any resources, or I mean, you mentioned your husband in this particular case, but maybe at different times in your academic or professional career, were there resources or mentors that proved to be particularly helpful for you?
So Chicago Grad did not exist until my last year at the University of Chicago, but there were events that were held that I found really useful, and I started going to those events my first semester at University of Chicago, and it was like, here's how you publish in a journal, and I was like, I need to publish in a journal? So I think that going to campus events, as busy as you are, is actually really valuable, because it's a mental break from what you're actually doing. And so even if you're not listening to what's being said, you may come up with a really great idea about what your research is and what you're working on. I think it's important to have these different breaks throughout your day. And then organizations at the University of Chicago are completely built to trying to foster successful lives for students, whether that means an academic path or whether that means a different path entirely. So make connections like Courtney or people who actually are looking out for your well-being and rely on them. For me personally, no, I attended events and received like interesting content, but I was a terrible networker, and so I didn't really rely on people the way I could have.
Thank you. So I think one final question, and I want to open this up to actually both Carly and Courtney, since Courtney, you have the opportunity to speak with a lot of people in similar position, have similar stories and advice to share. So I'd be interested from both of you, just any kind of final tips or pieces of advice in terms of how you sell your research background, research experience, your PhD to non-academics in the job search. I know, Carly, you mentioned storytelling was a skill that you picked up that I'm sure was particularly helpful in interviews and things, but yeah, just other pieces of advice or tips on kind of how you can position yourself well in the job search.
You start, Courtney.
Oh boy. I think storytelling, from the examples I've seen, storytelling is so key. When you're talking to people outside of the academy, they're not necessarily hostile to you wanting to try something else. People make career transitions all the time. It's totally a normal thing. But they often do want to know why you're doing that, what's motivating that decision, in part because you've shown yourself to be really passionate about a particular subject or a way of working for years, and they kind of wonder, oh, well, clearly you care so much about this thing. Why would you want to move beyond it? And of course, they have no context about job markets or anything like that. So I think as someone thinking about other options, if you can find the through line, the thing that connects the work you are doing now to what you want to be doing in the future, it's really helpful. So, throughout graduate school, I've always been interested in, international education or something. And so it's no wonder that I want to work at a company like this. And so I think for people outside the academy, that suddenly becomes much more legible because you've given them that narrative, connecting past, present, and future. And you've tried to speak their terms too, and shown why you're interested in their work. So it sounds kind of fuzzy, but really thinking about your story and how it intersects with the people you're talking to me, that's the kind of hard work that needs to be done.
I totally echo that, and will say that there are so many through lines because the work that we do, it has spanned so many years and bases of knowledge. So that's fantastic for us. So it depends on who's in the room. But what I worked on as a graduate student, maybe it's World War II history. Maybe it's racial positioning and performance. Maybe it's Japanese Americans. Maybe it's human behavior and motivation. Maybe it's propaganda. I worked on all of these things because I wrote a dissertation and researched a dissertation that touches on all of these topics. So I studied all of these elements. And I think that's just to underline what Courtney said. I have those through lines that are all things that I can speak passionately and capably about, even though I come from, East Asian languages and civilizations, home base as a discipline. I studied and feel like a real specialist in a lot of those different topics. And so that can be exciting to a lot of different groups and can make people perk up their ears and think of you as a real thought partner, even though if they were to read your dissertation, they'd be like, I'm not going to connect with this person. This is very specific. But there are so many different threads and so many different through lines because of the nature of the work that we have done as researchers.
Thank you both so much, Courtney, for facilitating the conversation, and Carly for sharing all of your career perspective with us. Thank you to everyone for attending and for participating today. After a 1-week hiatus, we'll be back with more alumni career programming on Thursday, April 28th, when we welcome UChicago Director of Admissions, Peter Wilson, for a webinar titled Admissions 411, Tips to Help You and Your High School Student Navigate the Process. So if you're an alum with a college-bound or soon-to-be college-bound child, we hope you'll take advantage of this opportunity to gain valuable insight into the admissions process for highly selective institutions. Our programming then continues into March, so I invite you to please visit our events page at careers.uchicagoalumni.org for our most up-to-date schedule of events. Take care, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.